President Yoon to visit Japan next week, seeking milestone momentum in Seoul-Tokyo ties, resolving a trade spat and expanding security and economic cooperation likely to top the agenda. North Korea fires a short-range ballistic missile supervised by leader Kim Jong-un ahead of Seoul-Washington joint drills. A big day for Team Korea facing off against Japan at the World Baseball Classic. It's a must-win game to reach the quarterfinals. Good afternoon. More details have emerged on North Korea's firing of a short-range ballistic missile yesterday. Its leader Kim Jong-un is said to have overseen the drill, saying that the regime should overwhelmingly respond to any war preparations by its enemy. All this coming ahead of Seoul-Washington joint drills. Kim Young-sun reports.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un supervised artillery training on Thursday, according to North Korea's state news agency Korean Central News Agency on Friday. Kim visited the Hwasong artillery units on the western front lines to give hands-on guidance. He reportedly said that they must grow and maintain their power to overwhelmingly counteract and suppress the enemy's war preparations. It's possible that he's referring to the Seoul-Washington joint military exercises, as the allies from next week will hold their biggest drill in years, dubbed Freedom Shield. Kim reportedly also took his daughter Kim Ju-ae to the artillery training. She's already appeared by her father's side during several state events this year. The news agency's report follows North Korea's missile firing on Thursday. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said on Thursday that at around 6:20 p.m., North Korea fired a short-range ballistic missile into the waters west of the Korean peninsula. The South Korean military is also looking into the possibility of North Korea firing multiple projectiles that day. And from the newly released photo from North Korea, it looks like at least 6 artillery vehicles fired projectiles. It's also noteworthy that North Korea chose to fire off to the west coast rather than the east. It's the first time in 4 months that the North has fired a short-range ballistic into the West Sea, as the East Coast is their usual choice for missile firings. This latest provocation also marks their 4th confirmed missile firing this year. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Following North Korea's latest missile test, the U.S. State Department warned Pyongyang of increased consequences of such actions. During a press briefing on Friday, State Department Press Secretary Ned Price said that if North Korea does not change its approach, it will face an increased cost. He added that the U.S. is hoping that North Korea will change its behavior through dialogue and diplomacy. South Korean President Yoon is set to visit Japan next week amid seemingly building momentum in Seoul-Tokyo ties. Resolving the two nations' trade spat and expanding security cooperation will likely top the agenda. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-young reports.
President Yoon will be in Tokyo next Thursday and Friday to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, the first top-level visit between the two countries in 12 years. While the exact details have not been confirmed, Yoon and Kishida are expected to discuss ways to overcome the two countries' trade spat and bolster military intel sharing to deter North Korea's nuclear and missile threat. Other possible topics are increasing economic and people-to-people exchanges, with a potential meeting of business leaders. First Lady Kim Gun-hee will join Yoon on his trip and hold a fellowship event with the Japanese PM's wife, Yuko Kishida. In a statement on Thursday, the top office said the visit resumes the top-level diplomacy after a pause of 12 years, and it will be an important milestone in the improvement and development of the bilateral relationship. The official announcement comes just 3 days after Seoul proposed compensating Korean victims of Japan's forced labor through private, voluntary funding rather than seeking reparations from Japanese firms. According to NHK, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told reporters late Thursday that Tokyo appreciates Seoul's announcement of its solution to the wartime labor woe, adding he is taking Yoon's visit as a chance to bolster bilateral relations. Meanwhile, the trip to Japan was announced less than 24 hours after the top office said Yoon had been invited to the U.S. for a state visit in late April. Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo have been emphasizing the importance of the trilateral cooperation amid North Korea's increased provocations in the region. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Over in Ukraine, Russia has unleashed massive airstrikes across Ukraine, killing at least 6 civilians. Russia says the attacks were in response to a border incursion last week that Moscow blamed on Kyiv. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Black smoke billows from the early morning sky in Kyiv, where air raid warnings have been blaring all night. Residential buildings and everything in sight have been destroyed. This comes as a wave of more than 80 Russian missiles struck cities across Ukraine, including the capital, the Black Sea port of Odessa, and Kharkiv, killing at least 6 civilians. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is still occupied by Russian forces, temporarily lost power amid Thursday's massive airstrike, with several other regions throughout the country also left without electricity. According to Moscow, the airstrike is in response to the border incursion last week that Moscow has blamed on Kyiv.
In response to terrorist acts in the Bryansk region on March 2nd, organized by Kyiv, the Russian armed forces have dealt a massive retaliatory strike.
The Kremlin says it used high-precision long-range air, sea, and land-based weapons, including the Kinzhal hypersonic missile system, to hit Ukrainian military infrastructure, military-industrial complex enterprises, as well as energy facilities that provide them. Meanwhile, the UN has called on Russia to extend the Black Sea grains export deal, with negotiations set to take place in Geneva next Monday. While the Russian government confirmed the meeting, Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov said Thursday that it would be quite complicated for Russia to renew the deal. Lavrov says the deal, which has been renewed once before, was being half fulfilled due to Western sanctions blocking the export of Russian fertilizers, which are also covered under the agreement. The agreement must be renewed by March 18th, with the UN and Ukraine hoping to get a deal in place in order to ease the global food crisis. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to formalize his unprecedented third term in office today. Thousands of delegates to the National People's Congress in Beijing will vote on Xi's appointment as president on Friday. The process is deemed as a formality, with approval virtually certain, as Xi was already confirmed as chief of the ruling Communist Party in October. Once appointed, Xi will become the first leader in Chinese history to serve a third term. This comes as the NPC in 2018 changed the law to remove the two-term limit on the presidency. Meanwhile, Li Chang, the second most powerful person in the party, as well as a close ally of Xi, is set to be appointed as China's new premier. U.S. President Joe Biden seeks a record level of military spending for next year, focused on countering China and Russia. According to his budget proposal released on Thursday, the Biden administration is requesting $842 billion for the Defense Department, a 3.2% increase from 2023. The budget seeks to, quote, outcompete China and proposes putting $9.1 billion into the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, aimed at protecting its allies and defending U.S. interests in the region. The funds will also be used to modernize America's nuclear deterrent capabilities, support Ukraine forces, and counter Russian cyber threats. This military spending will be part of a $6.8 trillion budget proposal that's also focused on reducing the deficit and raising taxes on the rich. On the economic front, South Korea's current account deficit reached a record high in January. That's mainly due to sluggish exports driven by a decline in outbound shipments of chips and other goods. Our Lee Dae-yeon explains.
South Korea's current account saw an all-time high deficit in January. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Friday shows that the country posted a current account deficit of over $4.5 billion, the highest figure since relevant data was first compiled in 1980. The current account was back in the red again in January following a surplus the previous month. This was largely driven by a record-high deficit for goods due to sluggish exports. The goods account recorded its biggest ever deficit at more than $7.4 billion, marking the fourth consecutive month in the red. Compared to the same period a year earlier, it dropped by $9 billion. Exports dropped almost 15% on year, making it 5 months in a row for on-year decline. With the global economic slowdown, exports for chips dropped 43.4% and steel products declined 24%. Imports, on the other hand, increased 1.1% on year, backed by consumer goods like cars and crops. Meanwhile, the deficit in the service account, which tracks earnings and spending on overseas trips and transport, came to around $3.2 billion in January. With eased COVID-19 measures, the travel balance tripled to $1.4 billion from a year ago. The Bank of Korea says this is expected to improve in February with more inbound Chinese travelers.
We saw a more than 100% increase in Chinese travelers in February. And as China resumes issuing short-term visas, South Korea lifting PCR tests for travelers from China, and the two countries to increase flights to the pre-pandemic levels, more foreign travelers are expected.
He added the average spending of Chinese travelers is higher than other countries, which may help narrow the deficit. The official also explained that the Bank of Korea said the current account balance as a percentage of GDP is expected to come in at around 1.5% this year. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
A groundbreaking ceremony was held yesterday for the Shaheen Project, a mega petrochemical facility in the South Korean city of Ulsan. The $7 billion project, which is the key fruit of South Korea's sales diplomacy with Saudi Arabia, is the largest single foreign investment in the country so far. Our Shin-young has more.
South Korea-based refiner S-Oil has begun construction of its Shaheen project. A groundbreaking ceremony for the $7 billion project took place on Thursday in the southeastern city of Ulsan. S-Oil finalized the project in November last year when the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, visited Seoul. It aims to build a steam cracking facility and other units to produce up to 3.2 million tons of petrochemical products a year. When the Shaheen project is completed, it is expected to play an important role in diversifying the company's petroleum refining business by expanding its portfolio in petrochemicals from 12% to over 25%. The project has investment from oil giant Saudi Aramco, the largest shareholder of S-Oil, marking the largest foreign investment project for a single industry in South Korea. During the groundbreaking ceremony on Thursday, President Yoon said that the project is a key achievement of economic diplomacy between South Korea and Saudi Arabia, pledging to provide a better environment in South Korea for foreign investment firms.
앞으로도 정부는 외국인 투자 기업들이 한국에서 마음껏 경영 활동을 할 수 있도록 세계 최고의 환경을 만들기 위해 최선을 다할 것입니다. 글로벌 스탠더드에 맞지 않는 규제는 과감하게 개선하고 대한민국을 세계 최고의 혁신 허브로 만들겠습니다.
Meanwhile, the project is expected to create 17,000 new jobs during the construction stage and an added value to the economy worth about 3 trillion won or over $2 billion. With the construction expected to be completed in 2026, South Korea's exports are forecast to increase by $900 million in the future. Shin-young, Arirang News.
South Korea will step up cooperation with Saudi Arabia to bolster efforts to enter the local market. Seoul's Ministry of SMEs and Startups said it signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Investment on Thursday. As part of the deal, the two countries will work on establishing a global business center in Saudi Arabian capital Riyadh, which will serve as a bridgehead for Korea to enter the market. It is expected to provide office space for Korean SMEs to use as a base for companies to build cooperative networks. The South Korean government expects the deal to stimulate investment between the two countries. South Korea has unveiled a new 5-year plan to improve the welfare of those with disabilities. Running a 24-hour care programs is among the plans, our Lee Si-hoo reports.
By the year 2026, the disabled in South Korea will have the option to pick and choose the types of welfare services they'd like to receive depending on their need. That's according to the comprehensive policy plans for the disabled announced on Thursday by the South Korean government. At a meeting led by Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, the specifics of the plans covering the next 5 years were explained by South Korea's Organization of Policy Coordination Committee for Persons with Disabilities. The plan aims to improve the quality of life of the disabled by supporting 8 different areas of their lives. The core areas for support include welfare, education, and culture and arts. Whereas until now, disability benefits in the form of services or stipends were predetermined by factors such as health conditions or income, in the coming years the system will change so that individuals can choose the types of benefits to a certain degree. For example, the disabled could use their stipends for purchasing support equipment or remodeling their personal vehicles to make them more accessible. This April, the pilot launch for the urgent 24-hour care program will take place in 17 cities and provinces around the country. A maximum of week-long care will be available for those with developmental disabilities in the absence of their caretakers. The government will also support disabled artist groups and create platforms for artwork sales. Meanwhile, the comprehensive policy plans for the disabled have been developed every 5 years since 1998. The plans announced Thursday are the 6th of their kind thus far. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
It's a big day for Team Korea. It is facing off against rivals Japan at the World Baseball Classic this evening at 7 p.m. at the Tokyo Dome. It's a must-win game for Korea to make it to the quarterfinals after defeat to Australia in the opening match. The group stages of the WBC kicked off earlier this week with 20 teams vying for the title. The top 2 teams from each pool get to move on to the quarterfinals. Staying in sports, the new head coach of South Korea's men's football team, Jurgen Klinsmann, held his first press conference since his appointment. He vowed to restore South Korea to their 2002 World Cup glory when the Taegu Warriors made it to the semi-finals. Our Choi Soo-young has this story.
South Korea's new head coach Jurgen Klinsmann on Thursday spoke to the nation's media for the first time since taking over the Taegu Warriors. He was appointed on Monday last week and arrived at Incheon Airport at 5 a.m. on Wednesday. At the Thursday's press conference, Klinsmann officially announced who will be joining his backroom staff. Andreas Herzog, who has been working with Klinsmann since 2011, is his number 2, while former Taegu Warrior and German-born Chaduri is a technical advisor. Michael Kim, who was part of Paolo Bento's staff, joins as a coach as 2 Italian Paolo Stringara, while Andreas Köpke is goalkeeper coach and Werner Luthert is fitness coach. Following questions about the specific tactics he will use, Klinsmann said that he respects Paolo Bento's ideas, the former manager, and he plans to communicate closely with players. He added that technical ability, body language, communication, and confidence will be the most key parts of his team. Moreover, as a legendary striker, he said that he will lead the team by attacking.
My personal background was a striker, so I always love to attack.
According to the Korea Football Association, Klinsmann has signed for a period of 3 years and 5 months until after the 2026 FIFA World Cup in North America and will reside in Korea during that time. He also mentioned that his coaching staff will move freely in and out of Korea, but they will always be with the players wherever and whenever they're needed. He said that he knows how to bring a confident energy and strong belief to a team, and has set a short-term blueprint to win the AFC Asian Cup in Qatar next January. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Israel, a gunman has been killed while carrying out what Israeli officials are calling a terrorist attack. At least 3 people were shot and wounded, with one in critical condition during the attack in the capital, Tel Aviv, on Thursday evening local time. The gunman was identified as a 23-year-old Palestinian man with links to militant group Hamas. According to reports, the attacker was shot dead by Israeli security forces after he opened fire in the crowded Dizengoff Street, a street known for its restaurants and markets. The shooting occurred just a few hours after 3 Palestinians were killed in a shootout with Israeli troops in the West Bank. The past year has been marked by a surge in violent conflict in the region. Moving on to Nigeria, at least 6 people have been killed and several injured after a train crashed into a public bus in the city of Lagos on Thursday local time. All of those who died were bus passengers, and at least 80 people were rescued from the bus wreckage. According to local officials, the crash occurred when the bus driver transporting government staff to work tried to outrun a train signal. Accidents from drivers not following traffic rules are common in the country. This in spite of newly introduced penalties for traffic violations. Taking a look at Latvia now, where cars confiscated from drunk drivers are being donated to Ukraine to aid its war effort. The first consignment of cars started their journey to the Ukrainian border on Wednesday local time. The move comes after Latvia changed a law allowing the government to confiscate vehicles from drivers with alcohol levels 3 times the legal limit and above. But with limited space at car impounds, the state decided to donate the cars to Ukraine instead of auctioning them. The cars are being transported by a non-profit called Twitter Convoy and will be given to Ukrainian hospitals and the military. With a small population of some 1.9 million people, Latvia records about 3,500 drunk driving cases per year. And finally, the French women's national football team has sacked its manager just 4 months before the World Cup. Corinne Diacre's sacking was announced by the French Football Federation on Thursday local time over what it called irreversible problems. It comes amid a series of recent resignations from the national team by high-profile footballers, including captain Wendy Renard. Players have criticized Diacre's management, but the former manager says she's been targeted as part of a smear campaign. The Women's World Cup will be jointly hosted by New Zealand and Australia and will kick off at Eden Park in Auckland on July 20th. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The warmest day of the season has arrived today, with highs to reach early summer-like levels. Seoul seeing highs jumping about 10 degrees higher than yesterday, which was unexpectedly murky and breezy all day. Meanwhile, those in the south will notice highs going slightly higher than yesterday. Meanwhile, dry air in the east of Gangwon-do and most of southeast regions showed no sign of easing up, with a dry advisory remaining in place. West of central regions in Jeju are dealing with high levels of fine dust on this pleasant spring day. So let's keep a face mask that can filter dust handy today. Temperatures are rising fast after a chilly morning under sunny skies, so please do dress accordingly. It's easy to catch a cold around this time. Then a nationwide mix of rain and snow on Sunday will put the brakes on unusually warm temperatures. A puffer jacket is needed for Monday's morning commute, going down to -2 degrees Celsius here in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.